Okay, we'll kick off now anyway. Thanks to everybody for joining, and people will obviously join in the next while as well. Um, I just really wanted to start off with saying we've been working with BullWall for many, many years now. It's probably the most exciting solution we've had in our vendor stack for the last 5 or 6 years. And I hope you'll agree with me after seeing today's presentation. It's completely different to anything else you will have seen. Um, and if you wouldn't mind just moving on the slide slightly. So people who are in attendance and who are doing the presentation today is myself. I head up the sales team in Renaissance here in Ireland. You're then going to be introduced to Andrew Grant, who heads up the sales for BullWall, and then Andy is going to do the interesting stuff. He's going to actually show you how BullWall works. Move on, please, Andrew. So for the session while it's live, everybody will be muted, but afterwards we will be opening that up. The session is recorded, so that people who are unable to attend will be able to play it back and have a look at it in their own time. If you have any questions at all during the chat, please send them into the chat, and we'll hope to get to them either during the session or we will contact you afterwards. So in the meantime, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Andrew.
Perfect. Thank you, Norman. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar this morning. Just as an introduction again, so my name's Andrew Grant, Sales Director here at BullWall, joined by my colleague Andy Walsh, who heads up the sales engineering team. What we'll take you through today in the next 45 minutes is a short overview to the BullWall solution, where it sits and also why it's needed, before we go through a live demonstration of the technology, showing a few different live ransomware attacks and how quickly our solution is able to contain an outbreak of encryption very, very quickly. Before we go into the technology itself, I'm just going to start things off by discussing the cyber kill chain that you can see on the slide right now. You may be familiar with this, originally made by the likes of Lockheed Martin about 10 to 15 years ago, where we start to review the different stages of a ransomware attack unfolding. And primarily a lot of investment in IT security technologies is around points 1 to 3 of how do we actually stop that intruder firstly getting on the network and actually deploying that ransomware. But what we're going to focus on today is actually point 7. So that point of impact when that ransomware payload has been delivered and illegitimate encryption is very much underway within your critical network shares and critical IT infrastructure. So there's 2 products within the BullWall technology stack that we can touch on. The main focus of today's webinar is going to be on our ransomware containment technology, which on a very high level is a 24/7 fully automated containment solution. Just so you're aware, and after the webinar, if you'd like further information, we also have an additional module, which is called Server Intrusion Protection, which is now looking at the different blind spots organizations may have to prevent things like lateral movement by implementing MFA on every single server login, but also looking at when that ransomware is being staged by a cyber criminal by monitoring the scheduled task manager within Windows, which are a high percentage of the attacks we see today, where those attacks are actually, or attack vectors are actually beginning from. So before we go into the technology, just to talk about the issue that we're seeing globally, whether it's across large organizations, it could be commercial businesses like MGM Grand, who got hit recently, well in excess of $100 million in downtime, and the impact that that's caused. But specifically around education, it's a very high area of focus for the cyber criminals. One, due to maybe the investment made within the education sector to actually stop these attacks from happening, but also the critical data that you hold within your organization, whether it be around PII information that they're able to actually take away from the business. So what we have here is a number of different examples where unfortunately these organizations have suffered a ransomware attack or incident one way or another. Unfortunately, they've made headline news off the back of it, despite that initial investment into IT security and trying to block that threat. Perhaps they had a dedicated IT department to actually stop that threat as well, yet they're still suffering these ransomware attacks globally. And when we recently did a survey to a number of global leaders within IT security, we surveyed over 450 IT professionals. And some of the feedback we got was quite eye-opening in terms of the investment they've already made across a number of different industries, that the feedback was 79% of those organizations felt that a ransomware attack was fairly imminent within their organization. And then we'd look at the contrast of that in terms of how they're looking to block that threat. Only 40% of those individuals felt that they were protected today. So there's a mismatch with those statistics of, if something were to happen, have you got the right technologies today to actually block that threat? And I think that's heightened even further when we start to look at that evolution of ransomware or malware over the past 30 years, where we saw that first strain of malware being released, and then the security industry adopted different technologies, starting off with antivirus to try and block that threat. And over the years, that's developed into things like next generation antivirus, EDR, XDR. We're currently within that phase of that zero trust or that multi-layered strategy to try and block that threat. But as you can see on the bottom half of the slide, that attack cadence is growing exponentially, even faster than the security industry is able to develop these technologies. And there wouldn't be a purpose to actually review our technology today if all of these different preventative approaches or first line of defense vendors were looking to block all of the different attacks that come into the organization all of the time across all of the different attack surfaces or vectors within the business, and also all of the threats that come into the organization today. If one of those elements were to drop by just say 1%, we have a gap within our organization. That could be something as simple as a missing patch on an operating system. It could be an application. It could be a zero-day vulnerability we've never seen before, or even your EDR or AV technology having the agent not talk back to the server. In all of those scenarios, we now have a gap where the cyber criminals could find a vulnerability to get their way through and start actually impacting or delivering that payload of ransomware within the organization. So introducing the BullWall ransomware containment solution to you. As I mentioned, it's a 24/7 fully automated containment solution, waiting for that worst case scenario when a ransomware outbreak is underway within your critical data and IT infrastructure within the organization. And there's three really key questions to consider when we're going through the live demo, but also to consider within your organization today. If a ransomware attack were to actually trigger or an outbreak was underway, would you be able to understand which files are becoming encrypted, but also where do they reside within that organization today? Are they in your on-premise file infrastructure? Is it in your cloud infrastructure? Is it in AWS, Azure, wherever your critical data might reside? The second point we need to identify very, very quickly is identifying patient zero, or that individual staff or student member that may have clicked on that malicious email, the attachment, plugged in a USB cable to actually initiate that encryption process. And if we can't address answers to questions 1 and 2, the ability to stop that ongoing illegitimate encryption within any organization globally is going to be near on impossible today. So keep them in mind of when we get to the demo, but also how your organization would react if something bypassed that first line of defense that you've already invested in today. And so to kind of go into that message a bit further, what we have here is a very simplified attack surface with a few animations to show you this in a visual sense. So we have our architecture here with our external traffic coming into the organization, and then we have our investment in our first line of defense, or that perimeter protection. That could be things like your email gateway, your corporate firewall, your web filtering or gateway solution, trying to deem if any of that traffic is malicious and if it needs to be blocked in any way. Following that, organizations today will have invested in multiple different endpoint security solutions, XDR, EDR, to try and block and prevent that attack from a local client perspective. But where we sit with BullWall RC is purely on that data storage and critical IT infrastructure layer of the organization, waiting for that illegitimate encryption to begin and then taking action. So if we start to simulate a ransomware attack unfolding in this scenario, we can see that the virus coming in from the outside world, one way or another, with all of these moving parts, the firewall could be bypassed, that end user's device could become compromised. And once it's past that layer within an organization, it's essentially whitelisted within the network. It can now look to essentially deliver what it's there to do start to encrypt data at a speed anywhere up to 50,000 files per minute within an organization. So if we're a matter of minutes or hours, if not days into that attack, we're going to have terabytes, if not petabytes worth of data we need to recover from, and that cost of recovery is really starting to mount up for this organization. But with RC installed, when we say we're listening out for that data and looking for that data encryption, we only need to see a handful of files becoming encrypted. That could be 10, 30, 50 files, but we can then pinpoint the individual user who started that illegitimate encryption within the organization and then put the relevant isolation steps in place. So that could be to shut down the device using our own technology, or we could even integrate that to an existing EDR or NAC-based solution you have today. But the overarching message with our technology is we don't care about the entry point, the ransomware strain or variant being utilized. All we need to know is what good data looks like to the organization, and anything outside of the norm, whether it's a known bad or an unknown threat, will be picked up one way or another, and the relevant isolation steps will take place. So when we get to the demo, there's 4 really key stages we're going to touch on and go into a bit more detail in when we show you the technology. The first one is around detection. So within the solution, we have 28 detection sensors, all working in conjunction with each other, essentially looking for different signs of illegitimate encryption and file corruption within your network shares, whether they're on-premise or in the cloud. As soon as we detect on illegitimate encryption take place, that build-up and speed of the response will trigger us to either shut down the device, disable that user in Active Directory, we could integrate to an EDR or NAC-based solution, but also alerting the IT department of what's actually taking place. So that could be through alerting through your SIEM solution, your SOC service, sending email notifications, so you're fully aware of what's happening to your data. The third part, and very, very critical from a recovery perspective, it's more of that analogy of damage limitation. How quickly did we actually stop that spread of encryption? And as mentioned, if that was 50,000 files per minute, it's going to be a very costly recovery process to go through. But with RC installed, we can limit that to just say 50 files. We can then provide a full accurate list of those encrypted files into a CSV format. So now linking back to your backup strategy today, whether you've invested in Veeam or Datto or TCS, you're able to start that recovery process very, very quickly. The final part of the technology is around reporting. So now looking at legislation like GDPR and also later this year, things like NIS2, we need to stay compliant and report in a timely fashion if we have personal information encrypted after such things as a ransomware attack. So after every incident we see, we'll automatically generate a GDPR headed report for you, capturing some of that critical information for you to simply print off, sign, and scan back over. This process all fully automated after it's been deployed. And from a deployment perspective, there's a couple of really key points to highlight. So the first part is we're an agentless technology, so there's nothing to be rolled out across your desktops, your laptops, your tablets, even the file servers or storage platform. All we require is a very lightweight VM, which can be deployed on premise or in AWS or Azure, wherever your VMs may sit. And when we're monitoring the data, we're not recursively scanning files, it's event-based within your organization. So listening out for those existing file event notifications, that is existing traffic within your network today. So there's no agent to roll out, and we're not recursively scanning files either. On top of that, we have cloud connectors. So as an organization, if you've invested in things like Office 365, SharePoint, Google Drive as an example, again, we're looking at signs of encryption, but we can customize that response in a different way. So as one example, you may have a user that's working from home, potentially on a personal device, maybe even a mobile phone. We're not going to have the permissions within RC to actually shut the device down because there's no agent deployed. But if that device started to synchronize that encrypted data up into the cloud tenancy, we can then take action to revoke the user's access, whether it be disable that user in Active Directory, Azure AD, revoking SMB share permissions. And the key purpose of this solution is to contain that one offending user within the organization away from the critical data of your business. And finally, before we jump to the demo, everything we've spoken about today does have a two-way RESTful API. So if it's integrating to your existing EDR solution, which could be anything from Sophos to CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, or Microsoft ATP, we can see an alert being generated, and then we can also make an API call to those technologies to make that isolation or quarantine the user. On top of that, if it's a SIEM solution like Splunk or Rapid7 or something of similar means, we can then look to send the event logs after an incident up to those technologies for you to do that further analysis after the attack. But overall, this solution can be built into your existing security strategy with multiple integration points as well. So at this stage, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Andy. We're going to take you through a short demo of the technology now. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Perfect. So yeah, what I'm going to take you through today, guys, is a high-level overview of our solution. And we're also going to fire off a number of simulations of ransomware to show you how it could get into an organization, but more importantly, how our solution deals with that threat. So as Andrew mentioned, RC is installed on a very lightweight server. Once that installation takes place, it's accessed by using a URL. So in my case, it's standard HTTP, but we can use SSL if required. As part of the prerequisites, we would ask you to create us a number of Active Directory groups. Now, based on the level of access determines what you can do within the tool, and we also harden down by using token-based authentication. So once you've added your credentials, you are presented with our dashboard, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on this later on in the demo. But the first thing we need to do within RC is onboard where that critical data and infrastructure exists. So these can be your file shares either on-prem or up in the cloud. They can be database servers, application servers, and your domain controllers. So as part of the prerequisites, we would ask you to create us a service account, and we would recommend a group managed service account. And that service account does not require any elevated permissions. It purely needs read access to the environments that we want to monitor. If we don't have the access, you can see here the tool will indicate that, but it will also advise the RC administrator that this environment is no longer being monitored. If you're using DFS, it's exactly the same principle. We just require read access to that namespace. And as Andrew mentioned, we do interact up into the cloud. So if you are using these cloud services like SharePoint Online, Google Drive, we are able to monitor the data that gets synchronized up into these environments. And a little bit later on in the demo, I'll take you through exactly how we do that. So once we've onboarded where that critical data resides, we need to look at how we do that detection against the ransomware. So on the right-hand side, we have a list of known bad, which consists of extensions, artifacts, and file headers. So as part of the subscription to the tool, we have a team in the back end that are regularly looking for these strains of ransomware. And as soon as we come across these, they're automatically pushed to your dashboard. Now, because we are that agentless solution, as soon as it hits here, we are protected. So in other words, we do not need to send any signature updates down to your local clients. But with RC, we're not solely reliant on this list of known bad. It basically enables us to detect that known strain of ransomware even quicker. But we do need to take into consideration that unknown ransomware or that zero-day exploit. And the way we do that is that we need to allow RC to learn your data over a short period of time using our built-in machine learning capabilities. What we are looking for is the good file extensions, but also the file headers associated to those extensions. So why is that important? Because if that unknown ransomware were to come into your environment, it will do one or two things. So firstly, it will look to encrypt that data by changing that file extension to an unknown extension. What that means is we've not seen that as part of our known bad. We've not seen it as part of our known good. We would detect it as an unknown strain of ransomware due to the speed of the encryption. So the reason we look against the file headers is that ransomware may come in and it may not encrypt by changing the file name on the file extension, but that encryption process will still alter the file header. So again, we are able to detect on that very, very quickly due to the speed of the encryption. But more importantly, we will go ahead and put those automatic isolation steps in place. So basically what we're highlighting from this screen is that we know about the known bad threat. We know about your known good data. More importantly, we are catering for that unknown threat as well. So I'm going to jump now onto our dashboard. And what we're looking at in the top left-hand side is our live log. And what is key to point out at this stage again is that we do not continually scan your network. These are all file-based notifications. So as soon as somebody makes a change to file, be it modified, created, deleted, or renamed, it's at this point we're checking that file for that illegitimate activity. With RC, we're utilizing that existing SMB and CIF protocol, which already exists within your Microsoft networks today. So when you introduce RC, you're not actually introducing any overhead. So in the center here, we have an activity live, and it just shows at any given time the files that are modified, created, deleted, or renamed. And then we just have a couple of graphical interfaces on our dashboard. But what we are looking at this stage is just that good flow of data. At this point, nothing bad is actually taking place. So what I have here is a Windows VM, which is connected to my domain and connected back to a file share that exists on my server. Now I'm going to fire off something here called a DMA locker. And what this ransomware will do, it will go and encrypt the files. That encryption process will not change the file name or the file extension, but it will alter the file header. So we can see that encryption has started. More importantly, that machine is now in the process of being isolated. So if we draw our attention to the dashboard, we can see that that ransomware has bypassed that first line of defense, actually starting that encryption. Now going to the file share in which I've just attacked, we can see a number of files have become encrypted, and I can see that due to the date stamp. And if I try and open one of these files, I can no longer view the contents of that because of that encryption process. So without RC in place, what would have happened is this ransomware would have freely started to encrypt everything on my file share. Now I've only got a handful of files, so you can have terabytes worth of data. In a very short period of time, that whole file infrastructure could be encrypted. And then there is every potential for that ransomware to jump to other file shares within the organization. So drawing attention back to the dashboard. So we can see straight away that ransomware has bypassed that first line defense. We very quickly reached our 100% alert level. We know the type of breakdown that is based on our detection sensors. And as Andrew mentioned, we have 28 different sensors that work together to build up to that 100% alert. More importantly, we have identified the individual and gone ahead and put those automatic isolation steps in place. So in my case, I sent a shutdown command. I disabled my user's account with Active Directory on-prem and up in the cloud at exactly the same time. But as Andrew mentioned, we do have interactions into existing EDR solutions. So if you have invested in these types of tools, we could utilize these to help with that isolation process. But the key point to this is as soon as we reach that 100% alert level, whatever has been defined within our isolation steps, we automatically do that. So now we've done our response, we need to look at how we do the recovery. Now, during the period of time of this attack, there were some good files generated, but more importantly, we're able to identify the individual. So yes, this person will lose that little bit of downtime, but we are talking about one person here with a handful of files rather than that whole file infrastructure. So the business as a whole would still be able to operate. We can go ahead and highlight these. We can then export that to a CSV or interact with existing backup solution. But what we have provided is that exact location that encryption has taken place. Now, bearing in mind the ransomware that I did trigger doesn't change the file name or the file extension. So if you were to be hitting this method, it could be potentially costly and timely. But with RC in place, what we will provide you is that 100% accurate report on where that encryption's taken place. But the final part to all of this is that any of these files were to contain that personal information, as Andrew mentioned, it will then become a data breach and would need to be reported. If not, you might just want to furnish that internal report. So depending on the type of issue it is, we can click on either of these buttons. And what we then have is that populated report, where some of this information here is free-form text, but we automatically populate when the attack starts. When it stops, we type in the summary, the location, the server. More important, at the bottom, we identify the file owner and the list of files that have become encrypted. So if you were to be hit by ransomware and these files were to contain personal information, what we provide here is enough for you to be able to report under a data breach. So that was my first simulation I wanted to take you through, and I hope you can see how quickly we're able to do that detection, how we can react in multiple different ways, how we can tailor that response to meet your requirements, and how quickly we can generate the recovery and the reports for you. So at this point, I'm just going to stop sharing one screen. I'm going to go ahead and jump to another quick setup. And hopefully everyone can see me okay. So let me just briefly explain what we're looking at here in the background. So I have my RC running. We have two laptops here in front of me. So the first one is running a cloud simulation. So in my case, this is SharePoint Online, but if you were to be using things like Google Drive, for example, it's exactly the same principle. The second one here is running one of those new EDR solutions. So in my case, it's a Sentinel-1, and we're not here to say anything bad about these types of solutions. We're just going to show you how we do that interaction to it. So I'll go ahead and jump to my SharePoint screen. What I'm going to do at this point is run a really old ransomware, which is the .WannaCry, which, as you may be aware, hit our NHS some years back. What I'm basically highlighting is that we don't care if that ransomware was released today, in the future, or in the past. What we're looking for is the telltale signs of that illegitimate activity. So if I go ahead now and hit attack, what this is doing is going and encrypting that local OneDrive store. And with that built-in synchronization process, these files are now going to be uploaded into the cloud with that .WannaCry extension. So for us to be able to manage the cloud, we need to obviously gain that trust. And we do that from a SharePoint perspective by creating an app registration. That app registration will provide RC with a unique client ID and client secret, which then added into RC then allows us to be trusted. Once we have that trust, we utilize the Microsoft webhooks, which then gives us the ability to monitor everything that sits underneath that SharePoint umbrella. So these are your team sites, your OneDrive sites, and your SharePoint sites. From a Google Drive perspective, it's exactly the same principle. We just require a Google project, which then gives us the ability, again, to monitor everything that sits under that Google Drive. Now, at this point, we are slightly reliant on cloud synchronization, so it can just take a few seconds longer. But what you'll see, we've reached that 100% alert level. We know the type of breakdown that is. We know the individual, and as you can see from this device, is actually in the process of being isolated, so shut down. So the reason this one is shutting down, because it is connected to my domain. But what happens if this user was accessing this data from a home device, a mobile phone device, for example? In that case, we can't see the device to isolate it, but because we can still see that individual and we still have that trust, we can put the necessary steps in place to go ahead and isolate that account. So in other words, stop any further synchronization, stopping that ransomware from spreading more up into the cloud. So in other words, it doesn't matter how that user's accessing the data, be it using the synchronization process directly on the cloud, it doesn't matter the type of device they're accessing that data from, because we can still see that illegitimate activity, we can put the necessary steps in place. So I'm just going to go ahead and reset my dashboard and then take you through the final simulation before we open up for any questions. So organizations will prevent the use of USB storage devices, but it doesn't prevent the use of a standard looking iPhone charging cable. Well, this part here is generally come preloaded with ransomware. So these cables are widely available. They're used by pen testers. They're called a USB Ninja cable, but also used by cybercriminals. So one of your end users could have purchased this from an untrusted source, plug that into the side of their laptop to charge their mobile phone as they are working. Now, if we go to our Sentinel-1 screen, what will happen in a second is that run box will appear. What that is doing is that going after that crown jewels data. So if I come back to my RC, we can see we've reached that 100% alert level. We know the type of breakdown that is based on our detection sensors. More importantly, we have identified that individual. So in the case of this device, as you can see, it's not shutting down. And the reason that is that we've made that call using our RESTful API up into Sentinel-1. So because we have the user's credentials, that call has been made with those user details. And all these types of EDR solutions will be able to identify the device or devices they are connected to with their built-in isolation process or quarantine that off the network. So if I go now to my Sentinel-1 screen, go to my file explorer, you can see I no longer have access to the network. If I tried to go to BBC, for example, my internet access has become blocked. And down at the bottom, my icon has indicated that this device has been quarantined by using those built-in security policies. So to summarize before I pass back, RC is installed on a very lightweight server. More importantly, in all these devices you've seen, we don't require an agent, so quick and easy to deploy. So we don't care how ransomware gets in, we don't care the strain of ransomware that gets in. What we are there for is to contain it very, very quickly, but more importantly, stop that costly downtime. So guys, thank you very much for allowing me to show you the demo. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Andy. I'll just share my screen one more time, and then we'll open up for questions. So everything you've seen today, if you following today's session, if you'd like to have a follow-up one-to-one demo, we'd be more than happy to do that with you. If you'd like to know more about our other module, server intrusion protection, happy to set up a separate session on that too. But also, after what you've seen today, we do offer a ransomware assessment test, which is essentially our version of a POC. The benefits of this are it's not a massive time commitment your side. We require 2 hours to conclude this with you. But essentially what we require, as Andy mentioned, is a very lightweight VM to be created. We can share the prerequisites if you're interested in scheduling one of these in. Once the server's been created, we will join a call to actually install the software itself. Then we'll go through some configuration changes by having an individual user's device, a user in Active Directory, and a test share to run these ransomware simulations onto in a very controlled fashion. The final part of the assessment, and we can record this session too, so you can share it with any other stakeholders within the organization, is essentially running different scenarios when it comes to illegitimate encryption. Firstly, with our technology disabled and simply in monitoring mode. And that gives you real insight into the investment you've made today into those endpoint security technologies, your perimeter security. Do you get any notifications from them? Do they block any threats at all? It's a bit of an eye-opener. We've tested against a lot of different technologies to date. The second part of the assessment is actually going to be with RC enabled, and that's going to be very similar to what Andy just showed in his demo then, of a user becoming disabled. We'll have a user's device being shut down, all in an automated way, but proving the technology in your environment. And from there, the deployment isn't too much further to go into too. But 2 hours, if it's something of interest, and for everyone who's joined today's call today, this would be free of charge if you'd like to schedule the assessment after what you've seen today. So at this stage of the webinar, what I'll do is maybe hand over to Norman, or we'll open up for questions if anyone on the call's got any.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Andy. As always, a very enlightening, if what's slightly scary, demonstration of exactly what ransomware can do out there in the wild. Currently, I have a few questions that have come through on the chat line. And I suppose one of the first questions, given that this is focused on education, that has come through, is that how many approximately across the planet does education customers or in this area does BullWall have? We're not exact figures, but you know, maybe proportionally.
Yeah, I think so. At the moment today, within Bull, we've got over 1,000 customers globally. Education, alongside local government and healthcare, are probably our key sectors. So a high proportion of that is across education, and that's Ireland, UK, but also in the US as well.
Perfect. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, and I can certainly warrant for that as well. We know certainly in the Irish marketplace, BullWall has been very successful in the education sector. What they're asking, and I can probably answer this one as well, is there any special educational discount? And as part of the agreement with HEAnet, there is a pricing special pricing put in place for anybody that comes under the HEAnet client list. So you can go onto the HEAnet website, you'll find our details, and you can contact us, and we can ensure that you get an understanding of where the pricing is. It's certainly that we put a special deal specifically together for the education marketplace in Ireland under the HEAnet. So the other one was, what does the installation process look like? And that's probably more for you, Andy.
Yeah, so typical deployment of ransomware can take 6 to 8 weeks. So the key point is, as soon as we have the server available, we need to onboard where that critical data resides, because as soon as we are onboarding that data, we're learning that data and we're building up the knowledge within RC. So between that 6 to 8 week process, we are learning the data, we're building up the isolation process and getting everything prepared in readiness for enabling that full automated isolation process.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm trying to find the actual other question in the Q&A. Oh, okay. Sorry. Many thanks for the demo. Is the solution depending on having on-site Active Directory?
Not at all. So we have many customers that have pure cloud environments where they don't have an on-prem presence. That's fine. We will still able to protect that cloud environment without an on-prem AD.
Great stuff. Great stuff. I suppose you know, the other people have asked me these questions in the past anyway, is, you know, how easy is this to maintain going forward, as far as an end user is concerned, or you know, a customer?
So from a day-to-day administration of the software, once we've obviously got everything fine-tuned and we're live, it's a very lightweight administrative piece of software. So that basically just sits in the background and monitors your data. The only time you'd ever need to do any administration is onboard any new shares, or if an alert were to be generated, or we release an update to the package. Otherwise, it just sits there and monitors your data and would only be called into action if we see something illegitimate.
Okay, perfect. And is there any maximum, you know, size customer in this environment, or even a minimum?
No, so our largest customer is 122,000 users, and it's a school district within Houston, Texas. We're monitoring everything from one server. So it really, there is no, and maybe Andrew can enlighten us a little bit more here, but there is no real maximum amount of users that we have. It all depends on the types of infrastructure that they're using. So as an example, we do have a bank where they have multiple different instances of RC installed due to the volume of traffic that's coming through the system. So when you purchase RC, we can either install the software once, or we can install it as many times as we need to, in case you have any types of air-gapped networks, or you have multiple sites where there's no domain trust. We can install RC as many times as required.
I think just on top of that as well, we've got quite a few multi-academy trusts that use this technology too, where each of the schools that they onboard might have a slightly different network. They might not all be synced together. So if that is the same as Andy said, there's no additional cost our side in terms of spinning up another VM. But if there was just say 10, 20 schools within a trust and they're all independent, you can then have an overarching view from your kind of HQ IT department to see all of the schools within the trust too.
Okay, no, that's perfect. I don't know if anybody else has any questions at the moment. It appears not. I think you've, as normal, answered most of the questions before people had them. So I think probably at this stage we might wind this down. But as I said, you know, contact us. You can go onto the HENet website as well as a client, and you can get more further information there. And there's obviously on the screen there, you can follow up a call, and you can obviously get your own ransomware assessment as well, which I would recommend people take the lads up on. I've certainly seen people do that and their eyes are open significantly, and it also helps drive any case going forward as well. So from me, thank you very much. Andrew, I'll hand over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Norman. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining this morning. If you need any further information, please do reach out or go to the HENet website.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you,
Take
everybody.
care. Bye-bye.